Good evening. My name is Jeanette Welsh. I'm the lead for education on the board of the Faculty of Emergency Nursing, and this is your MPhen session on human factors. I've programmed in 2 sessions on human factors. The first is before Christmas, the second is after. So this one is a general introduction to human factors, and we will focus on you as an individual rather than on anybody else. Usual webinar items as we go through. We are recording the session, and we ask people to stay on mute throughout. I won't be asking people to chat on camera or indeed off camera. I'll ask you to do the work reflectively, and then we'll have our conversations in the break. Please do not share the codes for the sessions. Your manager or yourselves are paying for this, and obviously we want you to benefit from it, not those who are not paying for the benefit. So let's start with a definition. Excuse me. Many of you will not have heard of human factors before, but I hope some will. So the International Ergonomics Association in 2000 said, human factors is the scientific discipline concerned with the understanding of interactions among humans and other elements of a system, and the profession that applies theory, principles, data, and methods to design in order to optimize human well-being and overall system performance. Okay. Whoa, sounds thrilling, Jeanette. So shall we try that again in English? Human factors is concerned with what people are being asked to do, their task, who is doing it, the individual and their individual competence, and where they're working, the organisation and its attributes, but also the physical space that they're working in and the equipment they're working with. And all of those are influenced by the wider societal concerns at the time, both local and national. So in some local areas, there will be big issues about one thing, and in other areas, there will be big issues about another. So it sort of depends what's the word on the street where you live and work. Obviously, if you work and live in a big city, for example, you know that there's lots of public transport about. The bigger your city, the more types of public transport there are, the more available they are, the less likely it is that you need your own transport, the less likely it is that parking is your issue. It's more likely to be, oh, I got stuck in the traffic on the bus or the tube or the tram or the train or whatever it was. If you live further out in rural areas, then it's highly probable you're relying on a car to get to work, and a lot of the stuff is about getting to work and parking. Major stresses in life, parking when you get to work. So those sort of things affect you as an individual just getting to work, and everybody else getting to work as well. And they also affect the type of patient that comes in and what's wrong with them. You know, if you work in a city where there's very slow traffic speeds, you're not going to get huge big car crashes. You'll get those where there's easy access to a motorway, or where there are windy roads in rural areas and people are going a wee bit too fast for the road conditions. So you get the general drift. People are going to be concerned about stuff that happens where they live and work, and that will have a slightly different flavour depending on where you are. I was just being told today by a consultant, she's off to Kenya for a visit to a hospital that her father had quite a lot of dealings with in its inception and then building and becoming what it is now. It's a 9-floor hospital now. And she was telling me that in the emergency department there, they have 3 shootings and 4 stabbings at least per day. Whoa, that's quite a lot. We don't see those in the UK anymore, not at those sort of rates. So let's have a look at the human factors stuff. So it's really important that we don't just learn from failure, we learn from success as well. I'm quite certain that your department is no different, your organization is no different to mine. There's always this, let's find someone to blame thing going on. Something went wrong, someone must be to blame. Well, actually, probably not. And how about you do a really thorough investigation? Don't panic. That's what your risk managers are for. And they will happily lead the investigation. You don't have to do it all by yourself. And when you find mistakes, try and edit those out of the way you work. But you miss a trick if you don't equally investigate when something went really well and edit those working methods in. So let me give you an example. We had a drug error. Who hasn't had a drug error? I defy any registered nurse to say they haven't had a drug error. If you didn't have one, you nearly have one. Everybody's made a mistake of some sort. This one was a fairly catastrophic one, but fortunately the patient didn't die, but it was very, very, very serious. So what happened? Well, we'd got a lady who was in AF, and we were working our way through the algorithms, as you do. And the next drug to go was Verapamil. Okay, Verapamil, 5 milligrams, here we go. So 2 staff nurses, both extremely competent staff nurses, very experienced, absolutely knew what they were doing, checked the drug together and gave it to the ED consultant who had asked for it. And again, ED consultant, extremely experienced, very knowledgeable, very competent, and gave the drug. It was only when the lady started twitching that they checked the outside of the vial properly and found they'd given vecuronium by mistake. Now, fortunately, they found their mistake immediately and were able to reverse it immediately. But you can imagine how shattered those 3 people were. 3 really experienced, knowledgeable, competent, very dedicated staff. Absolutely distraught and devastated because they had given the wrong drug to the patient. But how did those 3 people manage to do that? It's almost impossible to comprehend how that could have happened. So, on to the investigation. So the first thing that was obvious was that vecuronium and Verapamil sat next to each other on the shelf in the IV drug cupboard. Next to each other. That is a bit of a disaster waiting to happen. So what could we edit out of the process there to help the staff not make that mistake again? Well, we could start by putting all the anaesthetic drugs in a different cupboard so that anaesthetic drugs are only in that one and other IV drugs are only in that one. So that was an immediate safety step we could take. Took a little bit of doing, mind, because you've got to do the requisition to get a cupboard put up on the wall, but never mind. So that was the first thing. Now, both drugs do begin with V, and the vials are the same size, and the dose in the vial was the same. So what could you do about that? You know, what was the issue there? Well, the issue was the similarity. So when the staff checked the drug, they just did that glancing blow. We've all done it, where you go, yeah, that's such and such, and didn't look thoroughly. And they did it together. How many times have we done that? So we split it so that one person has to look at the drug and a second person has to look at the drug separately. You don't do it together. Now, in intensive care, of course, you have a quiet drug prep area where nobody comes to disturb you while you're prepping your drugs for exactly that reason, so that you carefully check and you're absolutely certain. At that point, the prescription wasn't written down, but it never is at these points, is it? It's always kind of written up in retrospect. But one thing you could do if you had a written prescription is the doctors can use what's called Tollman lettering. So they can change the letters that are different. So you put the VE or verapamil or vecuronium in lowercase, and then you put the R in uppercase, or the C in uppercase, and then carry on for the rest of the drug. Maybe the letter at the end is different, so make that uppercase as well. And then you look at the prescription because it looks a bit jarring and you have to kind of stop and think, what have you written there? So it just brings you to yourself so that you concentrate. And of course, what's the other problem? The number of distractions that those two nurses were working with. Horrendous number of distractions. And there's only so many distractions you can manage before you become, before you lose it and you can't multitask as much as you'd like to think you can. So let's have a look then at 3 interrelated parts of human factors. So the first part in all of this is the job. What job do we need to do? What is the you can see what I've got up there. So let's just talk those all through and wend our way through each of them in turn and look at what it is about those things that could lend themselves to error, and therefore it becomes a safety issue. So first of all, the nature of the task. Just by the what, actually some things are harder work than others. Some things require more concentration than others. So for example, if I need to do some suturing, I need time, space, quiet, good lighting, all that sort of thing. And I just need to concentrate. It's something that's really important. I've got to get it right. My cosmetic finish must be good. And so because my cosmetic finish must be good, I must get the opportunity to focus on the task. What about high pressure tasks? So for example, the kind of everybody's worst nightmare task is a cricothyroidotomy. Now, fortunately for us nurses, we're not the ones who are going to have to make the hole in the patient's neck. But that's a really high pressure, high scare level I've never done it before in anger sort of task. So that makes you really kind of wobbly and frightened. And am I going to get this right? Or am I not? Or like I've given you the example of the drugs there. We've got to concentrate to get the drug dose right and the drug mix right. And the next aspect of the job component is the workload. I'm quite certain you are all under extreme workload pressures at the moment. I've noticed our department fluctuates between about 84 and 100 patients. It was a bit less today. You begin to wonder where the supply is coming from, and is there anywhere any people that haven't been to the department yet? But 80 to 100 patients in a department is ridiculous. When you stop and think about that, that's at least 3 wards full of patients, 3 wards of acutely unwell or injured people. That's one heck of a lot. So that workload is massive, and it makes it really difficult. I'm sure you're going into work just dreading what you're going to walk into and coming out absolutely run ragged. And that workload is really, really difficult to sustain. In an ideal world, we'd have no more than 3 patients to each qualified member of staff, so that you have a chance to get everything done that you need to get done and a chance to go and deliver them to their destination. But we don't always achieve that, far from it. What about your working environment? Now, I don't particularly mean that everybody's got it in for you or something. I mean things like basic stuff: light, heat, ventilation, space. Some A&E departments were the original A&E departments were kind of the hut on the back of the hospital, the hut at the side. Certainly, I know the A&E department at my organisation used to be literally just at the front of the hospital, and they were like, let me think, there was a 4-bedded majors area, a couple of rooms that were used as resources, a room that was used for beers blocks, and a minors area. Now, I accept that was 20 odd years ago, but it was pokey and it was cramped, and there wasn't great lighting, and there wasn't great heating, there wasn't great ventilation, there certainly wasn't enough space. Then you walk into the new build and you find you've got really nice, comfortable sized cubicles. Great. I have got room to swing a cat in this. I've got enough room to move the trolley so I can get either side of the trolley if I need to. I've got wall mounted monitoring. I've got overhead light and an examination light in every cubicle. The main lighting is light and bright. I can see what I'm doing. I don't have to peer at stuff. There aren't any dark corners. I've got enough sinks everywhere. I've got plenty of places I can wash my hands and I can put stuff in a bin. So those sort of basic things about your working environment are really, really important. Now, most of us working in Western Europe have that sort of working environment, but you don't if you go abroad and you work somewhere else. What about design of displays and controls? Now, these things can confuse the heck out of you quite easily. There's a reason that most monitors have the lines where they do and the colours that they do, is because after a lot of faffing about and working it out, everyone's realised that actually you just need standard colours so that when I glance at a monitor, I know which line is the one I'm looking for. But the controls on monitors can be an absolute nightmare once you get into the menus to try and work out what you're doing. What about the syringe drivers? They're another lot. The syringe drivers or the volumetric pumps. Each of those is a bit different. We took part in a, I forget, it was a research study, and I forget what discipline the researcher was, but I think it was ergonomics or engineering. And she was getting us to test a new volumetric pump and watching how we interfaced with the controls and the displays. And she realized that it was just too complicated. But it wasn't until she watched us using it and watched us trying to find what we wanted to do next that she realized that the design of the display and the way that you had to select things from the menu was just not user-friendly. What do I mean by the role of procedures? Well, it's what purpose does that procedure have? So I've used quite clinical procedures so far. But, you know, what are the admission procedures when you decide your patient's going to come in? So the booking in procedures, for example, in an emergency department aren't too complicated. A receptionist takes basic details, determines matches up your health record, and then you're booked in and you take a seat, or the ambulance crew toddle off back to their ambulance. But then how does your admission process work? Do you just click a button and everything that is on your EPR in A&E is then finished, saved, and ready for opening up on the ward when the patient gets there? Or do you have to photocopy stuff, or do you have to scan stuff before you can go? Have you thought about your property checking procedures? How do you do that? So what's the role of various different procedures you do, and are they absolutely essential? What about things like checking your CDs? That's a procedure. Check your CDs between shifts so that you know how many you're starting with, how many you're finishing with, and whether anything else needs to be done about the location of CDs. So when you're thinking about the various different tasks, you really have to design them to take account of human limitations and strengths. So, for example, a non-A&E example, let's just think about a surgeon planning an operation. Now, I did vascular surgery before I went into A&E, and I had to go to theatre one day. I don't know why I had to go to theatre, actually. Oh, I know. For some reason, we were rather flush with nursing staff, and they were rather short of surgeons. So could one of us go to theatre and just do the assisting, holding on to instruments here, there and everywhere, until the second surgeon was freed from the first part of the procedure and could step in? Yeah, okay, I'll go to theatre. I've not seen a vascular operation. I've not seen this particular vascular operation. I'd quite like to see what they do. Off we go. So this was a femdistal graft. For those of you who don't know, and it was a long time ago, if your arteries get all furred up to your foot, you get intermittent claudication. And it's no good trying to core it all out, or it wasn't in those days. It didn't work. So they would put in a bypass graft. And what did they use as their bypass graft material? Well, they couldn't get anything fine enough that was manufactured. So they used veins from your arms, from the patient's arm. So the second surgeon was dissecting out the vein, and then the grafting in bit was going to be the vein turned round and put into the leg. Well, this operation went on and it went on and it went on. And the second surgeon finished his bit and off he went to lunch. And it went on and it went on. And I thought, there's a problem with this operation. And that is that we're all going to need the toilet soon. And we're all going to need lunch soon. And there didn't seem to be any consideration in the planning, and this was an elective operation. There didn't seem to be any consideration in the planning for that operation that anyone might need to go to the toilet, have a drink, actually sit down, because standing on your feet all the time in theatre is quite wearing. And you're standing still all the time as well. So humans have limits, and we have to really think about that. And I think the same will go, you've heard me say before, about the importance of taking breaks when you're working in the emergency floor. You need to have breaks. You need to go to the toilet. What's the things that people complain about? What do they say? Breach of human rights. It's not actually, if you look at the Human Rights Act, but you need to be able to deal with your bodily functions, and you just don't function well after 4 hours. So if you don't have breaks at about 4-hourly intervals, you just get worse and worse at what you're doing. And then the next point is that the job needs to match the physical and mental strength and limitations of the people doing it. So some people just can't do stuff, and that's no disrespect. I can't be doing with being a cancer nurse. I could not, for the life of me, sum up the enthusiasm to keep giving people chemotherapy. Great, and all credit to the people who can, but I can't. What's that about? Is that my physical issues? No, it's a mental thing. I would just be so fed up and bored with people getting really anxious about their cancer and coming backwards and forwards. And that sounds really mean, but I think vice versa, my colleagues who deal with cancer all the time wouldn't like the cut and thrust of emergency care, where you don't know exactly what sort of emergency is going to come through the door next, or if indeed it is an emergency. And I think just that sheer breadth of not knowing exactly what it will be really frightens some people, whereas having a predictable subset of healthcare is more comfortable. So there is that mental thing of, no, I really can't do this. And some days, you can't do things. I had a colleague who was very ill and had encephalitis, and she's back at work and she's doing really well, and she's been back at work a long time. But she can't do short-term memory. So you can't ask her to think on the hoof and do lots of quick adding up of figures or subtraction of anything. It takes her a long time to do that, but she's actually perfectly functional in other ways. So you need to match the job to the physical and mental limitations of people. And the mental aspects of a job can be a variety of things. So it might be how you perceive it. It might be, I see that as really hard, or I see that as really challenging, or I am really frightened by that, or that looks really interesting. So it just depends what it is. Now, you'll have come across, for example, lots of people on the television, not on the television, lots of people will say, I can't watch stuff on the telly because the blood on the television is always redder than in real life. There is something about that. I can get interested in something really up close when I'm dealing with it, but maybe I don't want to watch it on the television. Or maybe I just find dealing with certain sounds difficult. That may be an issue. Then there's the attentional thing. So some people can concentrate for a long time and do really, really well. And other people have got the attention span of a goldfish. Oh, there's the castle again. Da, 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 da. Oh, there's the castle again. So that attentional thing is really important. If you're going to need half an hour to do a task, then actually you need to have thought about that and planned it out so that you've got half an hour clear to do that task and nobody needs to be interfering with you while you do it. I'm thinking plastering, I'm thinking invasive lines, I'm thinking suturing. Those sort of tasks, you need to just be able to clear your mind, clear everybody else out and focus on that task. And then there's decision-making requirements. So some jobs have a huge demand for decision-making. And so I'm thinking there of being in charge of the department, the amount of decisions you've got to make one after another, and how those previous decisions you make affect the next ones. The speed of that can really defeat some people and they just can't do it. For some people, it's a bit more spatial awareness. I was talking to a senior general manager today who used to work in surgery, and I was explaining what she used to do as like Tetris. She would have to schedule the theatre and the surgeon and the anaesthetist and the staffing and the patients so that it all just worked together. And she looked at me, she said, "You're right, I do like Tetris. I'm rather good at it." But those sort of people can make those sort of decisions and slot things in, and they've got quite a good idea of where things are going to work. And other people can't do that. Writing the off duty. Some people are really good at going, right, if I do that, and that, there we go. That'll be marvellous because I've got the skill mix, I've got the numbers, and everybody's happy. So-and-so's off to see their child's Christmas play, so I know that's sorted. Actually, there's 3 of them off to that Christmas play because of children all in the same school. And then the other lot are due a school play tomorrow, so that's fine because blah, blah, blah. And so-and-so has their study day then, or their evening class, or whatever it is. So some people can do off duty. I'm shocking at it. Never could get the grip of off duty. So was that a reason I went into practice development? Probably. I don't have to do the off duty. But respect to the people who do it, because it's not my thing. Right. Now let's take some time to look at the individual member of staff doing the task, whatever the task is or the job. So first of all, you've got to think about how competent is that person at individual tasks or the job as a whole. Okay. Now we know, she says, looking for it. We know that there are a lot of skill competencies in emergency care. So today I printed off, I have to say this is not quite all of them, I printed off copies of all of the competencies that our emergency care staff have to complete. These are just skill or device competencies. That many. Now, what you'll see coming up on the website is various templates of something called Demonstration of Procedural Skill, or DOPS. You'll see a more refined version of what I've just shown you coming up in various guises on the site. There's some there already. The whole point of that is so that someone can see what competent looks like, and then practice it and practice it and practice it until they are good at it, and then we assess them as competent at that individual task. But you know what? That is a lot of individual tasks you've got to be able to do. And then you've got to be able to put all of those together and do the job. So you'll see why actually it's really quite important that your competence is the thing that is checked. Not just your knowledge, but your competence. And of course, you're going to expect me to say this. So therefore, I would encourage you to work towards your MThen qualification and complete all the competencies that are there and provide some evidence. And those DOPS forms, as they come up on the website, do feel free to use them. If you've got one the same at work and you're quite happy using the work one, that's fine. You don't have to use the Fen ones. The only thing I'll say is the Fen ones will have been through several sets of eyes in the education subgroup who will have scrutinised it. And there's people from all 4 countries of the UK and Ireland on that group. And so it will get thorough scrutiny, and everybody who can think of a way of it changing it will have done so. Now, what about the skills of that individual? So there might be the competence at the different tasks, but then people have skill. Some people are really skilled at engaging a patient really quickly. So they can do the quick rapport and they can hedge back. Some people are really good at being friendly and open with people. And they're good at engaging new members of staff and making them feel welcome and settling them in easily. Some people are so skilled at breaking bad news. They've been taught it, they settle down, they learn how to do it, but then they've got the edge on everyone else. Is that part of their personality? Yes, to a degree, but it's also something they've practiced and they've honed. You don't become a skilled piano player without hours and hours of practice. And the same applies at work. Your skill at work comes from hours of practice. My skill, if I was to look after a patient, comes from having done it thousands and thousands of times. So if I teach someone to put on a broad arm sling, for example, something very, very basic, I have done it literally thousands of times. So I make it look easy. But when you're first trying to learn to do it, it's just irritating when Jeanette makes it look easy, because Jeanette has that skill and you haven't yet. So that skill level can be modified and enhanced. Now, personality, I think we're all agreed, she says, without consulting you, that different personalities suit different areas of healthcare. So we all know the A&E nurses and the ITU nurses joke. It's Christmas, so I'm allowed to tell you this one. There was a Christmas card sent to ITU by ED. And on the front of the Christmas card is a tangled up bundle of Christmas lights all on. And it says, "Happy Christmas to the ITU nurses, love the ED nurses." Now, some of you will be chuckling at this point because you know exactly what I mean. When you deliver a patient to ITU, they always suck their teeth because your lines aren't perfectly organised and straight and everything's just a mess. And they suck their teeth for about an hour while they're getting it all sorted out and all straightened up. They like precision to the ITU nurses, and they like to be completely across their patient and everything in its place. A&E nurses kind of go, well, you got them alive. What more did you want? So there's a bit of personality there about who likes to just mess around with the chaos and who likes to have complete order and control. There's also that personality in A&E that likes the cut and thrust, that likes the unknown, that doesn't want the same thing day after day, that wants quick turnover. I don't want to get to know the patient. I want to fix the patient, move on. We're not very good at the ward bit of looking after the patient day after day. And why should we be? It's not what an emergency department's for. But, you know, I don't really want to get to know my patients, if I'm honest. I don't want to meet the same person day after day after day after day and come back to the same person kind of 3 weeks, 4 weeks, 5 weeks, 6 weeks. Thank you. That's not how my life works. I want them moved on and out. So that's about personality. It's also a little bit about attitude. Now, attitude's an interesting one because attitude can cause no end of difficulties. And intention and perception aren't always the same thing. So I'm thinking about one of our senior staff who had a complaint about her attitude from a patient. Now, what she was doing, and I know what she was doing because she always did it, she was trying to jolly the patient along. And she was doing it in a slightly sing-song way. Hello, right, come along then, let's get this sorted out. And and off she went. And she was being a little bit energetic and a little bit jovial and come on, let's get this done. And the patient felt really patronized by that and complained about her attitude. I can see both sides of it. And then what other attitudes do we come across? Well, patients will say that we've got an attitude towards them. Certainly our frequent attender patients will say they watch nurses. As they approach, the nurses roll their eyes and they go, oh. And they hear nurses say, not them again. Not her again, not him again. What is it this time? Not helpful. Just saying, not helpful. Totally understand that you do get fed up with seeing the same patient time and time again, but not helpful. Don't show the patient that you're fed up with them. And then risk perception. Now, this is an interesting one. I came across this some years ago. I didn't quite understand it at the time, but I've learned to understand it. And what this is about is how risky you think something is. Is there a risk attached to what you're about to do? How big is that risk? And are you prepared to take that risk? And where you see that most is in those conversations where the patient says no. So the patient says, no, thank you. Now, we looked at this last time, didn't we? We looked at consent and refusal and capacity. And we all know that a capacitous patient can make their own decisions. But when they say no to what we've proposed, that's a bit challenging. So you get a little bit of attitude about that. Everyone bristles, which means no. My advice is perfectly good. And everyone gets a little bit hoity-toity. Back goes straight, head goes back. And we get very twitchy about what the risks are attached to that refusal or the risks attached to self-discharge. But the man's name's just left my head. There is a professor in Manchester who's done some really interesting work around chest pain. And what he's found is that doctors' level of risk comfort is much, much lower than a patient's. So if you take a load of blood tests and you take the history and you plug it all into his algorithm, it's very clever. But if you do all that and you tell the patient, right, on the basis of all the results and the symptoms you've got, there's a 1% chance that you've had a heart attack. Most patients at that point will go, all right, I'll be off home. No doctor would discharge a patient with a 1% chance of an MI because there's a 1% chance of an MI. And if they get that wrong, that's not funny. But your average patient will take that risk because they see 1% as being really, really low and nothing to worry about. And people are like that in normal life as well. So everybody has a level of comfort with risk. And I think sometimes things feel very risky and they feel like you can't do this because the risks of doing it are too high. But just remember, other people don't always feel the same. And I think it's important to discuss that risk and how you feel about the risk being taken. So if you blend all of those together, and then we add in, you know, a good dash of your personality, all of that will influence your behavior in really complex ways. But the same applies to your patients as well. So that mixture of you and them, or your colleagues, you and your colleagues, will change how each of you behaves. And I'm sure you know that there are some people who just rub you up the wrong way. It doesn't matter how professional you try to be. There are some people you just think, probably best I don't work with them. I've met a couple of people like that in my career. And interestingly, one of them really rubbed me up the wrong way, but we worked incredibly well together. Don't really understand how that worked, but I found this person personally really, really annoying. But if you put that person and me working together, we were more efficient, and it wasn't about a competition. All a bit odd. There was no competition between us, but together we really got through the workload. And then I had another person that set me on edge slightly later in my career, and I just couldn't get anywhere working in the same area as that person. I just couldn't. End of. We just were constantly having conflict, and we just had to agree to differ and agree not to work together. Had we had to, you know, if we'd had to, then both of us were sufficiently professional to be able to do it. But given a choice, it was better we just didn't. Now that last line is important. Your personality is fixed. Your personality develops as you if any of you've watched the AFEN lectures on adolescence, you'll hear me saying that personality develops. I did this lecture, so that's why I know what the content was. That personality develops really develops during your adolescence, and then becomes, you know, that's how your personality is going to be from there on in. Before that, there's a little bit of room for maneuver, and your kind of sense of self and your identity and that who am I bit is all usually set and settled by the time you're in your early 20s. But your skills can be changed and enhanced in many, many ways throughout the rest of your life. And your attitudes can be changed and enhanced throughout your life. So there's room for that to change. And then the third aspect there that we had right at the beginning was your organisation. So there's a few things that we can talk about in relation to your organisation. Let's think about the work patterns. I'll mention it later, but I'll mention it now here as well. That short shift, long shift thing. Do we do long days and spend, 3 long days and spend the first 2 of your days off recovering? Or do you do 5 shorter days and have fewer days off, but you have them as days off, you don't spend the time recovering? What affects your work patterns? Is it something to do with childcare? Does childcare work better with longer days or shorter days? Or does parking work better with longer days because you arrive earlier at work and when there might be some parking spaces rather than a time when there might not be? It could be parking that's forcing your working patterns. It could be studying. It could be childcare commitments, family commitments of whatever sort. Or you might just be, whatever they put on the off duty. But the patterns of work that are expected from you are expected from you by your organisation. And then there's the culture of the workplace. How does your department function? And it isn't static. No department stays static. At different times, different cultures will pervade. Overall, what's the culture of emergency care? The culture of emergency care is get on with it, get the patient in, get them sorted, get them out. And it causes stress if we can't get them in and we can't get them sorted and we can't get them out, because that's what it's about. It's about moving through. Next one and the next one. Come on, let's get this moving. Some places the culture will be that you always stay over after the end of your shift. What's that about? Why? No martyrs here, please. I want you fit and well to do the next shift. Go home and sleep so you can come back and relieve me. Some places you're expected to turn up early. What's that about? One colleague said, well, you should always turn up half an hour before your shift so that the other shift can go home early. What? No. Turn up in good time to get yourself changed and ready to start your shift on time. You don't need to take over early. And you don't need to stay late. That's a bit of martyrdom both ways. How deferential is your workplace? Is it, I can't make a decision because every decision's got to go past the big boss? Why does the big boss employ people who can't make decisions? Madness. But probably a question to ask the big boss. What resources have you got? Have you got enough trolleys? Have you got enough linen? Have you got enough food? Have you got enough staff? And as I'm listing those off, you're probably sitting there going, no, run out of linen. Yeah, no, I definitely haven't got enough staff. So what resources have you got? Are you using them to the fullest extent? Are they getting time for maintenance? Can you get your cubicles cleaned? Can you get your machinery maintained? All your various bit of medical kit, is there time for that to have its daily maintenance checks and its weekly maintenance checks, its annual maintenance checks? And then how does communication work in your department? I'll do a lot more on each of the biggies on the next section. So there's quite a lot we can talk about in relation to communication. Very tempted to give you a video on that one and let someone else do the talking. But how do you get communication between your staff and then to your patients and to their relatives? And how do communications go up and down within your organisation? How does communication come out from management to you as staff? How does information go back up from you as staff to senior management? How does that work in your organisation? Is that well thought through? Does everybody know how it works? And does that method work or not? And every time you change your comms person or you change your chief exec, that will change because they'll want to zhuzh up the communications a bit. You wouldn't want it all to look like the 1950s, so I'm sympathetic to that. And then the leadership. What's the leadership like in your organisation? Is it very hierarchical? Is it a bit more level? Is it very dictatorial? Are you frightened of them? And that's really quite important. my organization is into shared decision making at the moment. We're off doing pathway, and some of you will pathway to excellence, and some of you will be striving for magnet accreditation, those sort of things. So we're into shared decision making, where it isn't always the manager who makes the decision. Depends what it is. If it's a decision the manager doesn't need to make, like let's go for, do I need to choose the colour on the office walls of the admin staff? Am I going to work in there? No. So do I get a say in that? Should I get a say in that? No. They've got to live with it. Let them choose. But that would be seen as shared decision making, so that it's not just one person who decides what's going where and who's doing what, and how things are going to run. Now, those sort of things are often overlooked when you're designing a job, but they really do impact how an individual behaves and how a group behaves. And so, when you're thinking, oh, well, we'll have a new job, we'll create a new job, have you really thought through how that new job will fit into the current work patterns, the culture? If you're creating a new job, what money will have to be given up? And who does that affect? What does that affect? And how are we going to communicate that we're going to do this differently? And who's going to lead that change? So all those sort of things. And some jobs you can design and bring in a candidate who is only too keen to create their job, make their job their own, and create a role. But other candidates don't want to create a job. They want to come into a job that existed before and just keep doing it because that's easier, and they don't want to do something a little bit different. Okay, so that's quite a lot to take in. We're going to have a break, and I'll let people ask questions during the break. So the recording will pause so that folks don't feel that they have to ask questions on camera. Okay, so we're going to have a break now for 10 minutes. Great. So that feels better. Having had a drink. Now, we're going to have a think in this section about yourself and what stuff you can control, because a lot of these things are quite hard work, but you can control them. So this is time now to go off and just think about what stuff can you control. Now, I'm nominally giving you 10 minutes, and we'll see how that goes. If it feels a bit too long and you're watching the recording, then obviously unpause. Anyway, what stuff can you control at work? Okay. So you compare your list to what we're going to do next. So you may have heard about this, but this is my bucket. And my bucket can take quite a lot of water, and bits slop out from time to time, and it's got a tap at the bottom. So this is my bucket of stress. Find plenty similar images if you care to consult Google. Now, why am I telling this? Because all of us have a bucket. All of us have capacity to cope with quite a lot of stress. But we can't cope when it starts overflowing because there's too much gone in and not enough's come out of the tap at the bottom. It's quite a useful picture, this, the sort of thing to put up in your staff room, sort of thing to put up in the office to remind yourself that actually you do just need to take the time and turn the tap at the bottom of the bucket and let out some stress. If you don't, you just kind of go round and round in circles, getting more and more wound up about stuff. And you don't function. You don't function at work. You don't function at home. You don't function full stop. And sometimes the stress comes from work. And sometimes the stress comes from home. And sometimes it comes from a mixture. And my staff will tell you, I always say something will change, because it always does. Something changes. So things are never permanently that stressful. I know it might feel like it at the moment. I know it might feel like you're at the beginning of winter and it's only going to get more stressful. But actually there is a way of coping. There is a way of coping for you. You might not know it yet. And I'm not going to tell you what it is because it will work for you, it might not work for me. But that bucket is just a good thing to remember. Now, what fills your bucket? Your bucket gets filled by being hungry, by being thirsty, by being angry or anxious. They're not the same thing. They work. By being late for everything or just one thing. By feeling lonely. And by being tired. These are called the HALT messages, and they're very heavily promoted in human factors training. There's a lot you can achieve by tackling HALT. Has the merit as well of meaning stop. So just stop doing it. And if you can stop filling your bucket up with these things, you have a chance of some of the stuff coming out and you being able to cope so much better with work, with the work environment, with the job, with the patients, with your colleagues. So let's start with hungry and thirsty, some ideas to prevent that. Okay, well, it's not, as the saying goes, it's not rocket science. This is stuff you know. How can you stop yourself getting hungry or thirsty at work? Well, you can't, but you can start not feeling hungry or thirsty. Now, I'm not suggesting to anyone whose stomach rebels at the thought of a 6 a.m. breakfast that they've got to sit down to a cooked breakfast. You absolutely don't. Work with your body. You know what time of day you get hungry. But you do need to plan what you're going to eat during a week. it's no good just thinking it'll all come together and we all look in the cupboards and see what there is. Do some forward planning so that when you go shopping, you've got a list and you can get what's on your list and you'll know that you've got the food available until the next time you're due to go shopping. Make sure that you have got either money or cards on you at work. If you're going to buy food at work, make sure you've got the means to do so. I'm not suggesting you have a lot. You don't need to find your purse has gone missing, but just enough. What about emergency supplies? Now, I put it in inverted commas because we all know that emergency chocolate doesn't last too long. But, and don't for goodness sake leave emergency chocolate in the car in the summer. But do you need food? Are you ravenously hungry as you get back into the car to leave work? Are you likely to have a major stomach rumble, snack attack at work? Or somewhere between the two? So, you decide where you want your emergency food supply, your granola bar or your muesli bar or your packet of crisps or whatever works for you, or your bar of chocolate. And make sure you've got that to hand in the car, in your locker or in your work bag. It really doesn't matter, it's what suits you. And if you're the sort that doesn't actually eat the emergency supplies but likes to know they're there, then just make sure your best before dates are all right and swap them out before they get there. And then the other thing that can help quite a lot is just a bottle of water to drink on the way to work, and then fill it up before you leave, so you've got a bottle of water to drink on the way back. Now, depending on the size of your bottle, you can get most of your fluid requirements in a day in that way. It doesn't stop it being necessary for you to have a drink at work, particularly if you're having a 12-hour shift. I wouldn't suggest that for a minute. But if we're just looking at how you can arrive at work hydrated and how you can get home hydrated, then that's one way to do it. And this is totally within your gift. I understand about breaks at work, but actually you guys are going to be doing the being in charge. So I'm going to tell you, you have to take a break at work and you have to let your other colleagues have a break at work. It doesn't matter how long the queues are in the supermarket. When you've been on the till for so long, you're taken off and you go and have a break. So it's the same applies to us. You have to have a break. But these sort of things help you just plan for food and drink so that when you do get a break, even if it's shorter than you'd like, you've got the supplies to hand to do something with. Okay. What about being angry? Well, there's a lot of us very angry about stuff at different times. You have a row before you leave the house and you're angry, or you've had a letter from somebody that's made you angry, you've had a text that makes you angry, you've read something on your news feed that's made you angry, or you've had a communication from above at work and it's made you angry. So there's those. Then there's actually, if you want to use something different for A, there's anxiety, and all sorts of things make us anxious. It could be you're having difficulties managing at home. Who knows? Maybe, you just can't work out childcare. You just can't work out how you're going to pay for the mortgage and the food and everything else. It could be that you're having real problems with your partner because they're anxious, or your housemates because, I don't know, somebody's had a bereavement maybe and it's not going so well. Or you've had a broken relationship of some sort. Have you fallen out with your parents, or you've fallen out with your boyfriend or your girlfriend, you've split up, going through a divorce, all those sort of things. They make you very anxious. So what about what we're going to do with this? Well, the trouble is that if you take all the home stuff to work, then your brain's fully occupied with it and you chunter and chunter and chunter. and you don't function. So I'm going to make a suggestion or two that were made to me when I was being trained in human factors. That somewhere between starting work, well, leaving home and starting work, you have got to actively dump that anger. And you've just got to go, no, that's it, parked, I'm not doing anything with it. And you don't pick it up again until you get back to that place. So here's some suggestions. That somewhere on your commute from home to work, you actively decide, right, that's it. At that point, I stop thinking about whatever it was that was bothering me, and I start thinking about work. And then vice versa, you stop thinking about work at that point on the way home, and you start thinking about home and what you're going to cook for tea or whatever. For me, that's a particular set of traffic lights about halfway through my commute. And when I get to that traffic light, that's it. I now start focusing on work, if that's the direction I'm going, or home, if that's the direction I'm going. Have to say that's been transformational for me to just go, right, I'm at the traffic light, so that's it. And it is actually just a decision. It really is just a decision. One of my human factors trainers said that for him, the point at which he just goes, no, we're done with that now, focus on work, is when he locks his car door. So for him, it was an audible signal that the clunk of the car door, followed by the clunk of the lock being locked. It's not a good sentence, is it? The lock being locked. You know what I mean? That double clunk was his audible signal that the only thing he thought about now was work. And then equally, when it unlocks and opens the car door, that's the audible signal to start thinking about home. Now, for me, that's a bit too late in the process. I think by the time I've got myself parked and what have you, I really should have had my head in the right space. But, you know, each of us are different. So that worked for him. And what works for somebody else might be the physical action. So actors will often talk about as you put on the costume, you become the character. And when you take off the costume, you become yourself again. So that sort of works with our work, because we have to put on a uniform and we have to take off a uniform. And these days, because of COVID, we're not going to and from work in our uniforms anymore. So you do have an opportunity to put on the costume and become the A&E nurse, and take off the costume and become Jeanette again, however you do that. So it's an active decision, nothing more, nothing less. It's an active decision on your own part that's it, I'm done with this for now, got something else to do. It's quite liberating, actually, because it doesn't chunter in your mind all the way through work. Then you do just focus. So please try it before you think I'm daft. Now, being late, I'm quite good at that. Being late is very stressful to some people. So let's have a think about how we can prevent that. Well, simple stuff, all the stuff your mum used to tell you, and it used to drive you nuts when you were at school. Is your school bag packed? So I'm going to say, is your work bag packed? So have you got your work bag sorted the night before? Is everything in it? Bar the lunch, maybe. Food and drink supply sorted? Well, I know how I do it now. I don't do it the night before. That suits some people. It doesn't suit me. But I have a routine now for that. So that's all sorted. Now, my biggest failing, I don't know how the rest of you find, but my biggest failing is thinking I can fit more into the time available than I really can. So the thing I have to do to make sure I'm not late is just focus on getting out of the house and not thinking I can do about 50 other tasks on the way, because I can't. And equally, it works the other way around. At work, people stay over because they think, oh, I'll be fine. I know I'll leave late, but yeah, but if you leave late, you eat into your own time. you eat into your sleeping time, and then you're not in a great space either. So none of us are irreplaceable. None of us are completely, the great I am. And we do have to just stop it and make sure that we focus on getting to work and back from work. Now, in some literature, you'll find that the L is lonely, not late. So the lonely is different, because late is stressy. Filling up my bucket with stress because I'm late. And all I can talk about when I get there is the traffic and the parking. When actually, if I'd just been a little bit more on it, and I hadn't tried to put the washing on and empty the dishwasher and get myself out of the house, if I'd just gone for get myself out of the house, it might have all just worked and I wouldn't have been stressy. And then we could get on with what I'm supposed to get on with, instead of wasting more time talking about the traffic and the parking. Lonely brings a different sort of stress. And I will say to you that the vast majority of our really challenging patients are at root lonely. They don't have enough human connection. And maybe you don't either. So you do need to make yourself do something apart from work. It can be very easy to just volunteer for extra shifts. That puts you with other people, but that'll make you tired as well. So you need to think about stuff outside work, and you actually do stuff with other people. Now, some people, you may have heard the introvert extrovert discussions. Now, introvert, particularly if you're thinking about Myers-Briggs personality questionnaires, actually introvert just means that you get your energy from inside, from being alone, whereas an extrovert gets their energy from being with other people. It isn't actually about your displayed behavior. So you probably know whether you get a real buzz from being with other people, and that really makes you think and makes you have ideas and makes you feel really great, or whether, given a complete choice of anything in the world, what you'd most like to do is curl up on your own and just read or sleep or gaze out the window. Anyway, it is important that you have some human connection and that you're not always just giving of yourself, which you do at work. You need something that gives to you and lets you turn the tap on that stress bucket and let it out. So it is good to join in something like group exercise, the yoga class, the Pilates class, the spin class, the aqua aerobics class, something of that nature. Or the running group, off we go for our run on Tuesday evening or whatever. So doing group exercise is much more fun than it is doing it by yourself. You might be a serious exerciser who just needs to get in the miles. Okay, that's fine. Go for your swim, go for your run, spend your time in the gym quietly, and that might work for you, and that's fine. But if you're going to be a lone exerciser, then you need to do something else that is a group activity. And it might be that you want to join a music group of some sort, a choir, an orchestra, a band. You might want to volunteer for something. There's lots of groups want volunteers for things. Lots of places want volunteers to go and help build this, clear that, do outdoorsy stuff. Lots of things are indoorsy things. You might prefer the sewing bee or the knitting circle or whatever. And then you need to make some time for relaxation. that's maybe just by yourself or with your family. You do need to make time to watch a film, to listen to music, to read, to craft in whatever way you like crafting. Just be creative. It might be gardening or something like that. You need to do those sort of things so that you have time to open out that tap on at the bottom of your stress bucket and just let all that stress out. And also time to spend with other people who aren't just taking from you and sapping all your energy. So really, really important that you do that and you think about doing that. And I know, I absolutely get it. You can't do that easily with shift work, but there are things you can do around shifts. So you just need to be a little bit creative and think what it is. And actually, it's really important you do have that time for you. Otherwise, you will become lonely and anxious, depressed. And that's not much fun for anyone. I'm tired. Yeah, boy, do we get tired. So instead of talking to you as an individual now, I'm going to talk to you as a writer of off-duty, because some of you will be writers of off-duty. Would you please give everybody enough time to sleep after night shifts? Can we not have night followed by early? Really? No, my circadian rhythms won't do that. We need night followed by night off, possibly 2, depending on how many nights I've done in the first place. I need some time to sleep, and then I'll sort myself around and I'll get back on with it. Other things you as an individual can do, don't pot around doing stuff. This is the opposite to focus of getting yourself to work on time. Get yourself to bed on time. Focus on it. Don't faff and pot around finding jobs to do. And I address that to myself as much as to any of you. And if you're worried about stuff, and I know a lot of people are, you know, even if it's something like, I need to follow up that patient because I was worried about them and I'd like to know what happened, write it down before you go to bed. Have some paper and a pen by your bed, write that down, and then you've parked it. It's on the paper. You won't forget. You'll see it in the morning and you'll be reminded, but you won't be awake all night going, I must remember, I must remember, I must remember. So I'm going to say all the sort of sleep hygiene stuff as well, that, you know, you have got to just get yourself off to sleep. And if that means a hot drink, if that means a bath, if it means a shower, if it means an hour without devices, if it means sitting in front of something to make you laugh on the telly before you go to bed, well, fine, do it. But don't do those sort of things at the expense of you getting 7 to 8 hours sleep a night. You'll be all right on 5 or 6 for a night or 2, might be even 3 or 4, but then it catches up with you. So if you're bone tired, go to bed. She says at nearly 9 o'clock at night, but that's okay because we're programmed to finish at 9, because I know people can't learn after 9. So here we are, we're nearly done. What have you learned as we've gone through this today? This is just a real skim across the surface of human factors. There's so much more to learn, and I find it fascinating. I hope you're finding it interesting, and I hope that you'll find the second one takes you to a bit more depth, and we look at very specific things you can do differently in your work that will enable you to do it much better with a lot less stress and with fewer mistakes. So you have a think now about what aspects of your personal life have you really had to think about as I've talked? And how will you use that at work? And what I want you to do is write that on your evaluation form. So those of you watching on catch up, the evaluation comes up right at the end of the video. And you can, once you've evaluated the lecture and press submit, then you get a certificate of attendance back into your inbox in about 10 minutes. It's all automated. Please don't worry that somebody's sitting there waiting for it. And if you put on your comments of what you learned, then that comes back with it too. So that it says nice and clearly that you attended the lectures on this subject, and these were the things you learned from it. And then that can go straight into your CPD-Me portfolio. And then you've got proof that you put in the hours and proof that you learned something from it and something to go back to and reflect on. And if your manager is being very kind and giving you time off in lieu, provided you've attended the lectures, then you've got that as well. You will have the evidence for your manager that you attended. So your 2 questions to answer are: what aspects of your personal working life have you been prompted to think about in more depth? And how will you use that at work? QR code, for those of you who need the QR code. And the next lecture will actually not be till January. Well, hey. So next week is the 3rd Thursday of the month. So it is a assessors webinar next week for learning to be an assessor of competence, to assess your more junior colleagues' portfolios. And then it's Christmas, and then it's New Year. And we're not doing lectures over Christmas, New Year, because you've got time to catch up, and you've got time to work, and you've got time to catch up with family, which is far more important. And when we come back, the 2nd week in January, we will do another look at human factors, and we will look at more in-depth stuff that you can observe around the world rather than being about you. And so it only remains for me to say Merry Christmas, and I hope that you have some nice relaxing time over the Christmas break, and I'll see you in the new year.